terrorism expert. She is the founder of actforamerica.org and the author of They Must Be Stopped, Why We Must Defeat Radical Islam and How We Can Do It. Brigitte Gabriel is with us. Hey, Brigitte, how are you?
Hey, my friend. I'm so glad to be back with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to talk to you. Unfortunately, I don't like talking about what we wind up talking about, but somebody's got to talk about it, I guess. So I come to you today after you said a couple of days ago already that this was definitely, the Boston bombing was definitely part of a plot and part of a multi-person plot, not just one or two people. And now, of course, we have reports that investigators are looking to a link between the older brother and a terrorist group in the Caucasus Emirate in Chechnya. We also have a report from a British newspaper that the FBI here, is looking for as many as 12 people in a cell. What do you think happened in Boston?
Well, we know, Steve, that these guys that carry such attacks, even though it appears in the beginning that this was a lone wolf, we know that they don't operate alone. They usually have support system. They usually have people that inspire them, that build them up, that encourage them, that carries them through until they either blow themselves up or they carry on their terrorist attacks. If you take, for example, Imam al-Awlaki, who was working with Nidal Hassan. Nidal Hassan carried the Fort Hood by himself, but he wasn't alone. He had links to Imam al-Awlaki constantly talking with him and other jihadist websites. So this is why we know that Tamerlan and Johar both were communicating with people overseas and communicating the FBI will release information. I'm not going to do it here on the radio right now, but the FBI will be releasing information as they finish their investigation as to who they were talking to here inside the country. But I can tell you, we have terrorist operatives operating here within our own country, not only Tamerlan and Johar, but others in different cities across America, and it's only a matter of time.
Well, okay. Do you know what the FBI is going to wind up telling us, or you're assuming based on what your research shows?
I pretty much know what the FBI is going to come out and say. We know that these people are a part of a cell. They're not operating individually. And the cell is not exactly a cell of al-Qaeda. I mean, we have framed the subject here in our country, Steve, that our only problem is al-Qaeda. When we think of anything radical Islam, we link it to al-Qaeda. What we need to pay attention to is the ideology that bonds them all together, whether it's al-Qaeda or Lashkar al-Taibi or Al-Shabaab or Hezbollah or Hamas. So while they may not call themselves an al-Qaeda cell, they are a cell that shares the same ideology that resembles al-Qaeda.
Right. And you talk about the FBI will wind up saying that this was part of a cell. A part of a cell with other members here in this country related to this attack still here and still on the loose?
Yes, under investigation and under monitoring. And as you just reported in the beginning of the show, Steve, right now in the beginning of this interview, look what's happening in Canada. Usually these guys work together. They network together. They communicate with each other. It's not that some guy, like in America, when a disgruntled young teenager who's very angry takes his rifle and goes to a school and shoots everybody else. In that case, it's a different type of attack. When it comes to terrorism, especially terrorism linked to the ideology of radical Islam, they are never alone. They work with other people and talk with other people.
All right. We're talking to Brigitte Gabriel here on the Steve Malzberg Show, and you could go to actforamerica.org, find out more about her wonderful organization and the great work that she does. Let me also ask you about this. Much was made about the Saudi person of interest. And then, of course, they told us he was not a person of interest. And then Steve Emerson broke the story that he was going to be deported on national security grounds. He had his visa revoked. Janet Napolitano has denied that. I believe she denied it to a congressional committee under oath. Yet it's been reported on townhall.com today by Todd Starnes that the Saudi national who we're talking about, it had been flagged on a terror watch list and was granted a student visa without being properly vetted, and that he will be deported. Now the Congress wants to talk to Napolitano again in closed session. How could it be a coincidence that if this is true, that this Saudi national on a terror watch list was at the marathon running after the bombing, and he had nothing to do with any of this?
And he had nothing to do with any of this, and the only reason we paid attention to him is because the bomb went off by these two other guys. Why aren't we following up on the tips that we have? If we have a national security list where we compare names and travelers on it, why aren't we connecting the dots 11 years after September 11th? And with the Saudi national, Steve, right now, the last information that I have is he is not going to be deported. I was just talking with Steve Emerson and Hannity, actually, 15 minutes ago, and that says he is not going to be deported, and we believe Janet Napolitano immediately changed the tune after Secretary of State Kerry met with the Saudi representative in an unscheduled meeting.
And the president was in there, too.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, this guy's not going to be deported. But it's a sad state of affairs, Steve, when we in this country, now we basically got three people that we knew they were bad people, but we never connected the dots. We never arrested and interrogated them. We never deported them. And if it wasn't for the Boston bombing, the Saudi guy and the two other guys, the Chechens, will be just walking our streets right now, and their neighbors thinking, oh, they're just wonderful guys. They're so nice. They're so smart. There is not a problem with them whatsoever.
All right, let me ask you this also, Brigitte. You know, these guys, and this lends credence to your theory, I believe, that these guys could not have acted alone. The bombs that they threw at the police, the pipe bombs that they had, the grenades that they had, that they kept on their person, and supposedly more explosives were found when the police was searching in their apartments and their living headquarters as well. So the arsenal that they had, if they weren't caught, or if they were smart enough from their point of view to, after the bombing, once they escaped, instead of hanging around, if they had gotten in a car and just drove to another part of the country, or God forbid, New York or D.C., they could have unleashed more terror the next day or 2 days later.
Exactly, and this is why the FBI and the authorities, Steve, were saying the next day that they believe that they were going to carry, that these terrorists, if they were not arrested or killed, they were going to carry terrorist attacks in other parts and in multiple locations. That's what they were referring to. You know, the reality of this is so frightening for the American public, because we knew that our authorities are trying to protect us from Al-Qaeda, from the major attacks, but we are not prepared as a society to deal with terrorist or suicide bombers like what Israel deals with, for example, who are just willing to basically go up to football games, to parades in different cities. I mean, look how many parades we have. Whatever holiday, whether it's 4th of July or whether it's Christmas or whatever, little towns love having parades. If they can do this at the Boston Marathon, lone wolf or terrorist sympathizers can do that in any city in the United States. And I believe, Steve, this is exactly the time we are moving into. We in the intelligence community knew that it's just a matter of time before we start seeing things like that. And I'm scared to say that this is the time we have arrived right now.
Well, let me ask you one more question. Congressman Peter King has said, not I don't think too recently, but he said fairly recently, that we know that Hezbollah comes across the border from Mexico, and we know that Hezbollah has agents and cells in this country, and that's years old. You and I have known that for years. Right. What do you think? Have they been given a green light? Will this precipitate? If this had nothing to do with Hezbollah, could this trigger some kind of green light given by the people that pull their strings? And what do you think? What do you think would have triggered would trigger a green light?
This will not apply to Hezbollah, and this will not give Hezbollah operatives in this country a green light, because Hezbollah is a much more sophisticated army. They are truly very well trained. They are more sophisticated than Al-Qaeda, and they do operate as the proxy army for Iran. Iran is not going to mobilize Hezbollah in the United States until Iran goes into a confrontation with Israel. Even if Israel does the preemptive attack, which you and I know that Israel is going to do sooner or later, later. At that time, Iran is not only going to retaliate against Israel, it's going to retaliate against the United States because they believe it is our weapons that we supply to the Israelis that's enabling the Israelis to commit the attack they're committing. That's when Iran is going to signal to their operatives in America to conduct whatever operations they need to do within the United States to strike terrors in the hearts of the unbelievers.
And Brigitte, I keep hearing from politicians trying to exploit this, and I'm sorry to say, I heard Paul Ryan say it just the other day, and there are some on the right that are reportedly in collusion on how to try to exploit this bombing into passing immigration reform. And from what I've seen of this immigration bill, I mean, not only will the people here have a path to citizenship, but their families will be invited to come on over. So, I mean, at a time when we need to be re-examining and throwing people out like the dead bomber who should never have been readmitted into this country, who should have been thrown out when he was convicted of domestic violence. Instead, we're letting everybody come in, and the only country in the world that we give their citizens an advantage to fast track through security when they come here are Saudis. I mean, how could you even make that up?
You know, it is sad, but because for too long we as Americans sat on the sidelines and just thought, oh, I'm just feeling so frustrated, you know, I'm going to let our government deal with this issue. It's way bigger than me. This is exactly, Steve, why we at Act for America are mobilizing citizens to stand up and say something now. We are having a national conference, a national security conference in Washington, D.C. in June. People can go to our website, actforamerica.org. We are challenging our elected officials. We're going to have legislative briefing. We already have members of Congress scheduled to speak about how we can protect this country, because we can no longer waste time talking about not offending other people that way, be offended because of political correctness, and what we can do to really protect the country. Peter King was accused of being an Islamophobe when he started conducting his Homeland Security hearings when he was the chairman about homegrown terrorism and what we need to watch out for. Well, you know what? Now, especially with the immigration reform subject is hot on a national scale, and after what happened in Boston, now is the time for the American public to stand up and say, we cannot afford to bring terrorists into our shores and grant them amnesty, especially with the FBI lacking whatever it needs to do in order to stop these terrorists and arrest them or expel them before they commit the terrorist attack.
You know, I don't want to take advantage of your time, but you know all this. And by the way, you're called an Islamophobe. I have been called that in the past. Anybody like us who's going to speak out and tell the truth and give warnings are going to be called those names. You know, Claire Lopez, former CIA operations officer, senior fellow with the Clarion Project, she was just on with me at the top of the show, and she just told about how the Muslim Brotherhood has infiltrated every branch of our government, including those closest advisors to John Brennan. So, I mean, we have a huge task ahead of us to call this what it is and to combat it, because the government isn't going to let us.
Exactly. And this is a country made by the people, for the people, and we, the people, need to come together and speak up. And remember that we elected those elected officials into office, and we can throw them out just as easy as we put them in. But the American public must feel empowered in order to do something about it.
I got you.
And that's why we want people to go to actforamerica.org and get involved.
All right. Brigitte Gabriel, thank you so much. Keep up the good work. We'll talk to you way before your conference down in Washington, okay?
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, you do.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. That's Brigitte Gabriel, and we're coming back, ladies and gentlemen, right here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Don't go away.